It started on a weekend like any other. I was 14. My best friend David had just turned 15. We were inseparable back then, gaming, goofing around, crashing at each other's houses. That night, his parents were away, which basically meant unlimited noise, junk food, and no bedtime. The den was our kingdom, and we ruled it with snacks and loud music. Around 4 a.m., the energy finally wore off. David, still wired, suggested we take a quick walk to chill out before trying to sleep. So, we strolled the block for 10 minutes, laughing, talking nonsense, and eventually made our way back. Now, David's house has this strange basement layout. Because of a hill in his front yard, one side of the basement is basically at ground level where the den is, and the other half dips lower into a kind of lounge with a TV and a couple of couches. That's where we plan to crash. David threw on a movie, tossed a blanket at me, and claimed the couch across the room. I was closest to the basement staircase. I don't even remember what movie he picked. I was out cold within minutes. Then, something pulled me back. I snapped awake to David crouched next to me, his face pale, hand on my shoulder. "Shhh," he whispered. "Listen." The movie was still playing, but now muted. Outside, the world was pitch black, still deep into the night. At first, I couldn't hear anything. I was groggy, in that half-conscious state where everything feels off. But then I caught it. A drawer upstairs sliding open. Then two slow creaks on the wooden floorboards. "I think someone's up there," David said in a hushed voice. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself it was just his cats. He had two of them that always roamed around the house at night. But then it happened. A pair of dry coughs, human, deliberate. And that was it. Whatever sleepiness I had left was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I jolted upright. The air in the room changed, like it was holding its breath. Then came the footsteps. They were slow, heavy, deliberate, and they were heading toward the basement stairs. David and I locked eyes. He looked like he was about to throw up. I dove off the couch, patting the floor in the dark for my phone. David killed the TV. Without saying a word, we both bolted through the basement, past the stairs we didn't dare look up, and tore through the door that led to the den. We sprinted across the street barefoot, crashing into our neighbor's bushes to hide. David pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called the cops. I kept my eyes on the windows. Then, movement. Just enough moonlight revealed a tall figure slowly pacing past the living room window. My breath caught in my throat. David relayed everything to the dispatcher. The wait felt endless. But then sirens. Red and blue lights sliced through the dark as two patrol cars came screeching into the cul-de-sac. We ran toward the officers like we were escaping from a war zone. While one officer stayed with us and took our statements, others stormed the house and began a search. A few minutes later, yelling. Then the sound of someone running through David's backyard. One officer sprinted to intercept through the gate. They got him. The guy, massive, easily over 6 feet 7 inches, probably close to 300 pounds, was dragged out of the woods in cuffs. He didn't have anything on him. Didn't take anything from the house either. Which made the whole thing that much scarier. What was he doing there? Why didn't he run sooner? Why just wait? That night didn't end with sleep. Not for us. We were too shaken. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like eyes watching us. It was the kind of fear that doesn't wear off quickly. And that was only the beginning. Sometimes the scariest moments in life don't feel like horror movies. They don't begin with screams or thunder or darkness. Sometimes, they begin with something as harmless as a craving for water. I was 18 at the time, barely, and living in a quiet little town that people would probably describe as sleepy or safe. Nothing ever really happened here. No late night drama. No serious crime. Just a simple place where you could walk alone at night without a second thought. Or at least, that's what I used to think. It was around 9 p.m., and I decided to go for a walk. The air was nice and cool, and music was flowing through my earbuds as I strolled through familiar streets I'd walked dozens of times before. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't alert. I was just walking. But soon, I realized I was thirsty. There was a small neighborhood store just a few blocks away, open late, usually until midnight. So I cut through an alley and made my way there. But when I arrived, something felt off. The lights were off. The windows were dark. No sign of movement inside. Strange, considering how early it still was. I stepped closer and called out, hoping maybe the owner was in the back or had just forgotten to turn the closed sign. My voice echoed in the still air. Nothing. I called out again. Still nothing. I was just about to turn around and head home when I heard it. The creak of a door hinge. Behind me. I spun around. The porch light had flicked on above the door. The store's front door was now half open, and in the dim glow, I could make out a silhouette standing just inside. A man. At first, I felt a sense of relief. Finally, someone. I started walking toward the entrance, already pulling a few bills from my pocket to pay for a water bottle. But as I got closer, that sense of comfort began to crack. His face was off. It was subtle, but undeniable. His eyes looked too wide. His smile too stiff. And in his hand, catching the porch light like a mirror, was a knife. He didn't raise it. He didn't move toward me. Just stood there in the doorway, still as a statue, watching. "I was busy in the kitchen," he said with a dry, raspy chuckle. I froze. Everything in my body told me to turn around. But instead I smiled, nodded, and handed him the money. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. Maybe I thought I was being dramatic. Maybe I was scared of what might happen if I did. He vanished into the back for what felt like an eternity, then returned still holding the knife along with a bottle of water. I said thank you. He didn't answer. And I left. I turned up my music to drown out my thoughts and kept walking, trying to convince myself that I'd overreacted. That it was nothing. That he was just a weird guy, maybe cutting vegetables or something. But the unease didn't go away. I felt it crawling up my spine, pressing on the back of my neck. And then I knew I was being watched. I turned. No one. Still, I picked up my pace. The street was empty, quiet, too quiet. I stopped to catch my breath and opened the water bottle. That's when my earbud slipped out. Just in time to hear it. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Coming straight for me. I spun around and there he was. 10 feet away. Closer than I could have imagined. Same wild eyes. Same knife. I ran. Adrenaline surged through me like fire. I didn't think, I didn't look back, I just ran. I don't remember the path I took or how I dodged the cracks in the pavement. All I remember is the sound of something heavy hitting the ground behind me hard. Like he'd tripped. That was my chance. I made it to my house and slammed the door behind me. My parents were already awake, startled by the noise. I couldn't speak, just pointed at the door and tried to explain what had happened. They called the police immediately. A few days later, we got an update. The store owner had been arrested. And that's when the real nightmare began. He wasn't just a strange man with bad timing. The police found things in his store. Things no one should ever find. Freezers. Bodies. Organs. He'd been involved in black market trafficking, harvesting people. Selling them. Killing them. And I'd nearly become his next customer. Or his next product. I still walk at night sometimes. Old habits die hard. But I never pass that store. And I never walk without looking over my shoulder. I live in a small town tucked away in Nevada. If you're imagining casinos and neon lights, you're thinking of the other side of the state. Where I live, there's more desert than people. More silence than music. And on most nights, all you'll hear is the wind dragging sand across the dirt roads. It's peaceful. And sometimes, it's lonely. There's not much to do around here unless you're into off-roading or hiking. I happen to be into both. I've got 2 dogs, Buddy and Snoopy, both mutts, both loyal as hell. They've been with me on more trails than most people I know. Behind my house stretches a seemingly endless patch of desert. No traffic. No neighbors. Just open space and 2 distant mountains standing like ancient sentinels. When I walk my dogs, I don't use leashes. They don't need them out here. One evening not too long ago I decided to take them out for a long walk. The sun was starting to dip behind the hills, painting everything in this warm orange hue. The kind that makes the sand glow and the shadows stretch. We wandered off the beaten path, past the dried brush and toward the base of one of the mountains. The dogs were ahead of me, sniffing around and occasionally barking at rabbits they'd never catch. I had no destination in mind, just walking to clear my head. But something felt different that night. Not wrong. Just off. The air was colder than usual. And the silence, which I usually loved, felt somehow heavier. Like the whole desert was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Sometimes being alone too long can play tricks on your senses. About a mile in, we reached this narrow ravine. It cut through the land like a scar, dry and empty now, but probably full of water during the rare rains. The dogs hesitated at the edge, which was strange, they usually charged ahead. I knelt beside them and looked down. Nothing but dry earth and rocks. I was about to move on when Buddy growled. Not a bark. A growl. Low. Deep. Primal. I stood up and followed his gaze across the ravine. That's when I saw it. A figure. Standing still on the far side of the ridge. Motionless. Watching us. Too far to make out the details, but close enough that I knew it wasn't just a rock or tree or shadow. Someone was out there. Now, I'm not the paranoid type, but there's something unsettling about seeing another person that deep in the desert, especially without a car nearby, and especially when they're just standing there, doing nothing. I raised a hand and waved, half hoping they'd wave back. They didn't move. I called out, "Hey. You all right over there?" Still nothing. Just that stillness. The dogs were tense now, their bodies rigid, tails low. That's when the figure moved. It didn't walk away. It crouched. As if trying to disappear into the dirt. I'm not going to lie, every instinct I had screamed to leave. I turned and started walking back, faster than before. I didn't want to run and trigger my dogs, but I wasn't about to linger either. After about 5 minutes, I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. But that didn't calm me. You don't see someone that far into the desert by accident. And they don't just vanish. When I finally reached the house, I bolted the gate behind me and brought the dogs inside. They were still uneasy pacing, ears twitching at every noise. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the windows, listening for anything unusual. The next morning, I returned with my ATV to see if I could find footprints, anything. But when I got to the ravine, there were no tracks. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there. And maybe that should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Because it meant one of two things. Either I imagined it all, or someone had been there and knew how to cover their trail. I still hike out there. Still walk with my dogs. But never that deep. Not anymore. And never after sunset. These two mountains less than half a mile apart look peaceful from a distance. But in the winter, they become something else entirely. Harsh. Unforgiving. Almost like they don't want you there. I called them Mountain A and Mountain B. Mountain A was my usual spot, an easier trail, a clear path up. Mountain B, though, steep, rocky, and honestly, not my first choice. The day before this hike, the weather had been brutal. Wind strong enough to tip over a semi-truck. Snow covering everything. But by the next morning, the skies had started to clear. Not exactly ideal conditions, but I felt restless and I needed that hike. My dad didn't like the idea of me going alone, so he and my aunt decided to join me. Originally, I wanted to stick with Mountain A. But my aunt noticed the sun hitting the side of Mountain B and suggested we head that way instead. I hesitated. That trail wasn't forgiving. But eventually, I gave in. We set off, crunching through muddy desert ground and snow-covered bushes. Light flakes kissed our faces, and the wind had mostly died down. As we approached Mountain B, we saw something strange: tire tracks in the snow, old and faded. It made no sense. Who would drive up here in weather like this? Still, we brushed it off. Now, the scariest part of Mountain B, at least for me, was the sharp rock section. Even in good weather, those rocks are hard to cross. But now, covered in snow and ice, they looked treacherous. Still, we managed. Carefully. Step by step. And finally, we reached the summit. It wasn't as magical as I expected. The top was littered with trash, beer bottles, food wrappers, and dead bushes. It looked abandoned and forgotten. But the view? That part still took my breath away. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos of my dogs with the town in the background. That's when I noticed them, both dogs sniffing intensely around a dead bush. I called them, but they ignored me. Curious, I walked over. At first, I thought it was just trash, burnt cardboard scattered around the base of the bush. But when I bent down and picked up a piece, my stomach turned. It wasn't cardboard. It was part of a photograph, burnt and torn, but still detailed. An old portrait. Black and white. And on the piece I held, a single eye stared back at me. But not just any eye. It was familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. I froze. That eye, it looked just like my grandfather's. My dad and aunt didn't think much of it at first. Just thought it was weird. But I couldn't shake the feeling. We started heading back down the trail, but something inside me kept nagging. I needed to go back. We returned to the bush and carefully gathered every piece of the photograph we could find. The wind was picking up again, and our fingers were numb, but we pieced them together like a morbid puzzle. When it was done, we stepped back. The full photo was my grandfather. The same one who had died decades ago. The same exact photo hanging in my mom's bedroom. I was horrified. This was impossible. There was only one copy of that photograph, and it had never left our house. I started panicking. Was someone watching us? Had someone broken into our home? Were they sending a message? We grabbed the pieces and left fast. As we descended the mountain, I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to call my mom, but of course no signal. When we finally got home, I ran inside. My mom was in the kitchen. My brother was playing video games. Everything looked normal. But I hugged my mom tight, like I hadn't seen her in years. She asked what was going on, and I told her everything. I showed her the photograph, now pieced back together. Her face turned pale. She recognized it immediately. It was her father. She was terrified. We rushed to her room and the original photo was still hanging there, untouched. So what was this copy doing on the mountain? Who had it? Why was it destroyed? Then my mom told me something that changed everything. She had spoken to my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, and when she explained what happened, my grandmother confessed something she had kept to herself. She said, she had told my uncle to get rid of the photo. Just the night before our hike. She claimed that every time she looked at that photo, the eyes stared back at her. No matter where she was in the room. It gave her chills. She couldn't take it anymore. So she asked my uncle to destroy it. And apparently, he did. He and his brother had gone drinking and, in the middle of a snowstorm, drove up that very mountain in the pitch dark. He said the wind was too strong to burn it, so he tore the photo into pieces and left it there. But here's what I can't wrap my head around. Why was it on Mountain B? Why didn't the wind blow the pieces away? Why weren't they buried under the snow? The pieces were just sitting there like they had been waiting for us. Like they wanted to be found. Like the photograph didn't want to be forgotten. After what happened with the photograph, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way the pieces were just there, perfectly placed like a trap. Or a message. And when I thought that was the end of the strange events tied to that mountain, something else happened. And it shook me even more. About a week later, I met a woman while hiking near Mountain B again. She looked a little lost, her face pale, her eyes sunken and distant, like she hadn't slept in days. She was with a young boy, her son, maybe 10 or 11. I noticed them because they weren't dressed for hiking. No boots, no jackets. The boy was wearing sneakers soaked from the snow, and the woman, she didn't even have gloves. She approached me cautiously. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft, but desperate. "Do you know the way to the main road?" I nodded and pointed her toward the trail leading back to the parking lot. "Just follow that path downhill," I told her. "You'll be there in 15 minutes. She looked relieved, kind of. But something was off. Her eyes lingered on mine, like she wanted to say something else. Her lips parted, then closed again. She turned to the boy and whispered something I couldn't hear. I hesitated, then asked, "Are you two okay?" She nodded. "We're fine. Just lost track of time." That should have been the end of it. I should have just said goodbye and moved on. But something kept tugging at my gut. Something wasn't right. Are you sure you don't need help? I asked again. She paused. Looked over her shoulder toward Mountain B. Then she said something I'll never forget. We came here to say goodbye. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just smiled sad and tired and started walking, her son following close behind. I stood there for a moment, watching them go. I even pulled out my phone to snap a picture of the trail behind them, mostly to remember the interaction. The photo came out fine. But when I looked at it later that night, something was wrong. The woman wasn't in it. The boy was there walking alone. But she was gone. At first, I thought maybe she had already stepped out of frame. But I remembered exactly when I took it. She was standing right beside him. I zoomed in. The trees cast long shadows, and the light was fading, but it was clear only one set of footprints led away from that spot. And that wasn't all. I checked the weather report. The day she spoke to me, the day they were supposedly hiking, was freezing. Wind chill near zero. And the storm had started early that morning. No one in their right mind would be out there without gear. I tried telling my family, but no one knew what to make of it. They thought maybe she had stepped off the trail, or maybe I just misremembered. But I didn't. I know what I saw. The boy. His soaked shoes. Her eyes haunted. Her voice when she said goodbye. And I know what I didn't see in that photo. The woman never showed up again. I even asked around, posted in a local hiking forum, hoping someone else had seen her. Nothing. No one had a clue who she was. It was like she vanished. And that boy. He never spoke. Not once. Just followed her quietly, like he was used to this kind of thing. Like it wasn't the first time they had walked into the cold together. Sometimes I wonder if he was even alive. Sometimes I wonder if she was. But one thing is for sure. That mountain doesn't forget people. And it doesn't like to let go. The house that was never alone. It was just me, my brother G, and Mom for most of the year. Dad was away, and we found ourselves clustering together in Mom's room at night. She hated sleeping alone, always too creeped out by the dark, so we'd all gather under the covers, the TV flickering softly in the background. It was the late 90s. Netflix didn't exist, and the internet was a distant idea. So, when a movie came on TV, we'd plan around it. One night, around 9 p.m., we gathered in Mom's room for our movie. G, at just 2 years old, was still mastering crawling. We settled in to watch, but something was missing, the snacks. Potato chips, Doritos. How could we have a movie night without them? So, Mom and I dashed to the kitchen, eager to grab them. Our house wasn't large, but it was long. From the living room, a narrow corridor led past the rooms, and at the end was Mom's bedroom. The kitchen was at the far end of the hallway. With snacks in hand, we rushed back about 30 seconds, tops. But when we returned, we were met with something strange. G was still lying in the middle of the bed, but he was laughing, for no apparent reason. And the bed, the covers. They were no longer just undone, they had been neatly folded at the foot of the bed. Mom and I looked at each other, both wondering if we had missed something. But nothing else seemed to be out of place. We checked under the bed, inside the closet, and then locked the door. Trying to shrug off the uneasy feeling, we watched the movie and went to bed, leaving the TV on for comfort. Nothing more happened that night. A few years later. Fast forward 4 years. I was 13, and Dad had finally returned home. We were all in Mom's room one morning, waiting for her to finish putting on her earrings. It was going to be a fun trip to the amusement park. But then came a loud, disturbing noise, something banging and screeching outside the kitchen. We went to investigate. In the bright light of morning, with Dad home, we felt safe. But when we opened the kitchen door, we were met with an odd sight. The washing machine was violently shaking, banging against the floor, and dragging itself across the room. It had never acted like this before. Mom looked spooked, but Dad chuckled, assuming she had programmed it incorrectly. He adjusted the timer, and it stopped. We all laughed it off. But then, just as we were about to leave, it started up again. This time, the machine was shaking so hard it seemed like it would jump off the floor. No matter what Dad did, it wouldn't stop. Not until Mom unplugged it, with Dad and I holding the machine in place. The silence that followed was thick, and we stood there, staring at the unplugged machine, wondering what was going on. The last incident. 3 more years passed, and I was 16. One day, Mom asked me and G if we wanted to go with her to the supermarket. G wasn't interested, so I stayed behind, sitting at the computer, while he played on his PS2. But then, the unmistakable sound of someone at the gate reached my ears. I thought it was Mom returning from the store, so I got up to help bring in the groceries. But when I opened the door, I froze. G was standing outside the gate with Mom. He had been with her the entire time. Yet, in that moment, I could have sworn I had heard him running past my room just moments before. I looked at Mom and asked, "When did you leave the house?" Her answer made my heart race. G hadn't been with her when she left. The realization hit me: someone, or something, had been imitating his voice. The last memory. I moved to another country years later, but one night, I woke up feeling like something was off. The only light in the room was from the TV. The pit in my stomach grew as I realized I wasn't in my room anymore. I was back in that house. The room I hadn't seen in years. And then I saw her, the woman. She stood by the door, her black hair hanging over her face, wearing a white nightgown. Even though I couldn't see her eyes, I could feel her gaze on me. I was paralyzed, unable to move, my body as if it was weighed down by something invisible. She wasn't just staring at me. Her attention turned toward my parents, who were asleep in bed next to me. And then, I felt it: anger. She was angry, and that anger poured into me, flooding my mind with thoughts I could barely control. I pushed myself up, still groggy, and stared at her, rage building inside me. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was done being afraid. As I charged her, I felt a strange calmness. The moment we touched, the anger disappeared, replaced by a cold, suffocating loneliness. I pushed her aside and ran towards the hallway, slamming open a door, and just like that, I woke up. The daylight was pouring into my room, the TV was off, and I was back in the present. The vividness of the dream shook me. I had seen strange things in that house, but this felt different. Real. The story begins in a calm, almost mundane setting. The narrator, living in a first-floor apartment while their husband is away, feels an increasing sense of unease. The protagonist's normally peaceful life has been disrupted by a creeping feeling of paranoia. The protagonist describes how they had been living on their own while their husband worked away. This was nothing new, they had gotten used to the solitude. But lately, something had been off. A lingering sense of dread, like something was about to happen, settled over them. The protagonist recounts their experience with sleep paralysis, a regular, but frightening, occurrence for them. One night, as their body lay frozen and immobile, they felt a dark presence in the room. The figure was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, in a white nightgown, staring at them with hollow, black eyes. The girl was holding a small teddy bear, dangling lifelessly from her hand. The figure didn't speak or move, but the sensation of dread was overwhelming. When the protagonist finally woke up, they convinced themselves it was just another nightmare. But that image lingered, haunting them in the days that followed. At night, while walking their dog, the protagonist begins to notice a black cat following them. It's always in the shadows, watching them closely. The cat doesn't seem to be a regular stray, it has an uncanny presence, almost as if it's stalking them. The protagonist can't shake the feeling that the cat is somehow connected to something darker, an omen perhaps. They try to dismiss it, but the cat's presence only grows more disturbing with each night. The protagonist starts to notice more strange occurrences, as if the world around them is becoming subtly twisted. One night, around 2:45 a.m., the protagonist is jolted awake by the sound of their doorbell ringing. Confused and frightened, they stumble to the door, unsure if they had dreamt the sound or if it was real. They peer through the peephole but see nothing. They open the door to check the porch, but again, there's no one there. The ringing doorbell could have been a malfunction, but something doesn't sit right. They can't shake the feeling that something is about to happen. Over the next few days, the protagonist begins to notice teddy bears appearing in the most unusual places, in a sticker on a bathroom mirror, on the side of the road, in a store, even in their niece's odd request for one. At first, they dismiss it as coincidence, but the frequency with which they see these teddy bears begins to unnerve them. There's something sinister about these sightings that they can't quite explain. The protagonist's sense of paranoia intensifies. They begin to feel like they're being watched, like there's a connection between the teddy bears, the black cat, and the eerie dreams. The sense of something dark drawing closer builds with every passing day. The tension ramps up as the protagonist encounters a terrifying, tangible manifestation of their growing fear. One night, the protagonist is woken again by the doorbell. They check the peephole, but there's no one there. They open the door cautiously, and that's when they see it, a huge, mangled teddy bear, sitting against the wall next to the front door. This isn't any normal teddy bear, it's large, filthy, and worn. The fur is matted with dirt and grass, and there are stains on it, as if it had been through some terrible ordeal. The red bow around its neck is frayed, and stuffing has begun spilling out. The protagonist stands frozen, unable to comprehend how this bear got there. It seems impossible, yet it's right in front of them. They check the street outside, but it's empty. Who would leave such an ominous gift? The protagonist feels overwhelmed by fear, unsure whether they should call the police or just deal with it themselves. The presence of the bear feels like an omen, like it's waiting for something. Despite the intense fear, the protagonist decides they must do something. They don rubber gloves, grab the bear, and take it to the dumpster, not wanting to touch it with their bare hands. They try to push the fear from their mind, but a deep, unsettling feeling persists. What did it mean? Who left it? Was it just a prank, or was something darker at play? The next encounter sets the stage for even more unsettling developments. A few days after the bear incident, the protagonist is at the grocery store, hurriedly buying last-minute Christmas items. As they struggle to load their bags into the car, a man approaches them, offering help with their hatchback. He's dressed in worn, dirty work clothes, with a slightly rough look to him. Despite the protagonist's discomfort, the man insists on helping. He opens the hatchback and hands them a small, new teddy bear with a Santa hat. The protagonist is taken aback, unsure how to react. Why is he giving them this bear? They don't have children. The man's deep, piercing blue eyes seem to look right through them. It feels like a trap, or at least a strange omen. They refuse the bear, awkwardly thanking him, and quickly get into their car. But as they drive away, they look back in the rearview mirror to see the man's angry expression. The protagonist can't stop thinking about the strange encounter. Could this man be connected to the bear on their doorstep? Is he following them? The overwhelming sense of paranoia builds again, and the protagonist starts to question their own sanity. Was this all just a coincidence, or was something more sinister at play? In the final segment, the tension peaks and leaves the story unresolved, maintaining the eerie atmosphere. The protagonist tries to push everything to the back of their mind. It's Christmas Eve, and they're preparing for the holidays. But the tension lingers. The fear, the strange sightings, the unnerving teddy bear gift, everything feels like it's building towards something. The protagonist reflects on the inexplicable events. What was the true meaning behind the teddy bears, the black cat, the strange man? Were they being stalked, or was there something supernatural going on? The questions remain unanswered. The story closes with a lingering sense of dread, leaving the audience to question what really happened and whether the protagonist will ever truly escape the shadows that have been haunting them. And with that, dear listener, we find ourselves at the end of another chilling tale. But the story doesn't have to end here. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this with anyone you think could use a little extra thrill in their lives. After all, the dark is always watching, and you'll never know when the next story will come creeping around the corner. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, not everything that goes bump in the night is just the wind.